Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for the Boston Globe's Sustainability Week and for this discussion, Sustainability, Fashion, and Social Justice. I'm Kimberly Atkins Storr. I'm a senior opinion writer and columnist at the Globe, and this conversation stems from a series that I'm working on for Globe Opinion, so keep an eye out for that. But it is my honor to introduce our very distinguished panel of experts. Ngozi Okaro is an activist for economic, environmental, and social justice. And she's also an expert in strategic planning and operations, leading leadership development and innovation with a special expertise in mapping and managing change for growth stage enterprises. She's the executive director of Custom Collaborative, and that is an organization that trains, mentors, and advocates for and with low and no income and immigrant women to build the skills necessary to achieve economic success in the sustainable fashion industry and in broader society. Also, we're joined by Jennifer Verkamp. She is professor and chair of the fashion design department at the Massachusetts College of Art and co-founder of Sustainable Fashion Collaborative in Boston. Jennifer is a costume and clothing designer who studied fashion design at the London College of Fashion, costume design in Florence, Italy, and fashion and jewelry at the Domus Academy in Milan, Italy. She was previously the costume director for the Boston Arts Academy. And we're joined by Alex DeBaugh. He's a second generation leathersmith and founder of Anybag, a sustainable fashion brand keeping trash out of waterways and landfills by turning it into luxury bags. In the New York City factory, the one his immigrant father founded as a leather goods company, and a place that Alex says he grew up in, he turns plastic bags into beautiful products and is currently working to scale up to increase the output and hire more workers, all from right within New York. Welcome to all of you. I invite you all to turn on your cameras so we can begin our conversation.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you all. Thank you all. And while we wait for Alex to turn his camera on and learn a little bit of, there he is. Hello, Alex. Thanks for joining us. So I want to start with you, Alex, because I've been to your factory there in New York City where you're making these bags, and it's a factory that was a leather goods shop, and you saw a need and that became Anybag. Can you briefly tell us the story of Anybag and how you started making these bags out of plastic?
Of course. So Anybag, short for New York bag, was started about 3 years ago from just an idea, a crazy idea I had one night. But we are a leather goods factory of 40 years. We produce the latest and greatest for just about every designer you can think of. But one of our specialties is woven textiles, woven leathers in particular. And from that machinery that I had, the expertise I've gained just working here all my life, side by side with my father, I saw an opportunity to take all our waste and regenerate it into a textile using the machinery that we have, using the hand looms that we have. And to date, we've collected close to 14,000 pounds of single-use plastic bags in, I'd say, the last 18 months since we really started revved it up. But we take trash, soft film, single-use plastic bags, strip it down, make it one long continuous piece, and then hand loom it together, hand weave it on a hand loom right on 29th and 6th Avenue, Manhattan.
And in this factory, as I said, I was there watching this work happen. You're doing it right with people who live in New York, from trash that you source from New York. It's a very local operation. Talk about that aspect of it and how it's very New York focused.
What I like to say, besides the name, it's made in Manhattan by New Yorkers using New York City's finest trash. It's all about the community, what we're building, what we're creating. But my artisans, I don't call them my employees, but like it's almost my family. I've known them for so long. But we've been, we make product that sells for a few $1,000s for all the big designers out there. So these are leather artisans that they're phenomenal at their craft, and we just took something that usually everybody second guesses or throws away and gave it a better purpose. So we're learning a new process. We learn something new every day while we're doing this. When we first started it, we were taping all the plastic together, then realizing this would take forever to make a single bag. And then one night watching the Food Network, I saw a heat sealer for a sous vide machine, and I was like, Eureka, this is it. We brought that in. So we're constantly learning different ways to speed up the capacity and scale this up. But in the future, when we talk about scalability, we're actually building an automated loom right now. And I know everybody thinks automation will lose jobs, but this is actually going to create 23 jobs with every loom we produce. And the beauty of this is that we're able to tap into markets or areas and neighborhoods that are usually underserved. So, I mean, and communities that are underserved. But if you're autistic, you have a disability, formerly incarcerated, whatever it is, you're trying to get feedback on the ground, you come to us and you're going to get a way above minimum wage, livable wage, paying job starting at $20 to $35 an hour. And you have, there's a sense of community that because, we're bringing people in from the local areas, but it's a job with an impact. We're cleaning up the city, cleaning up the communities, and removing all the waste and the trash. This way we all have, cleaner parks and cleaner cities to play and live in.
And Ngozi, this reminds me, hearing Alex talk about the story of Anybag, of part of the conversation that we had where you made what I think is a really crucial point, is that when we're thinking about sustainability in the fashion industry and how that goes hand in hand with social justice, it feels very big. It feels like a big problem that will be difficult to tackle. But you pointed out that the real innovation is happening on the local level, and that's where the industry should be looking. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Sure. And I want to say I really love what Alex is talking about. And so Alex will have to get together offline, because it's absolutely right. There's not just waste like these byproduct that Alex is using to create a new textile, but there's also people who can do things, who come from communities that have been marginalized, that can really be brought into this, bring their own innovations and do work. So I'm so glad to hear someone talking about the two sides of what we might call sustainability or ethical fashion. So I think, can you tell me the question again? I was so excited to listen to it.
How the innovation is being driven locally.
Absolutely. So I think about a few things when I'm reflecting on the innovation. There are many people who I know who have small businesses who are doing amazing things. So KD New York is creating vegetable cashmere that will be made in a facility in the Bronx, right? So he's not a large company, but he's figured out a way with different types of engineers, internationally, to make something that is valuable. I know that Mara Hoffman is using now a vegetable-based spandex, and then they also send clothing wrapped in paper, a special type of paper rather than plastic. So there are people innovating, like I think about Thean Shiros, who's a material scientist at FIT. There are people who are innovating on this small scale and showing what we can all do. And so I think it's incumbent upon the companies to move, bigger companies to move away from this make and waste type of economy, to actually looking at the innovations that these small businesses are doing, like Alex, and expanding on them.
And Ngozi, tell us about your work at Custom Collaborative in this space.
Sure. So Custom Collaborative is a nonprofit social enterprise. We're located in New York, and we provide skills, networks, training, all the things necessary for low and no income and immigrant women to develop careers in sustainable fashion. The first part of our work is a training institute, which is a 15-week, 30-hour per week program where women learn about sustainability. They learn how to do design and produce clothing. They graduate with a business plan, so they learn all about entrepreneurship. And it is so important for us as an organization to make sure that the people who are in the communities that are most affected by the environmental harm are also part of the solution and actually understand what's going on. So it's my great joy to be part of a team that provides the access and pathways for people to be engaged in the sustainability movement.
And Jennifer, both as a designer and as an educator, talk a little bit about how people entering the industry right now are thinking about this differently or should be thinking about this differently. In the past, it was the way that clothing manufacturing and design was done was very different, but it led to this linear sort of way of thinking about fashion where you create something, you create something, you source it, you sell it, people buy it, and then they eventually throw it away. And how they're thinking about things entirely differently or innovating. How do you incorporate that in what you teach fashion students?
Sure, thanks. Well, I just want to pick up also with what Alex and Ngozi were saying. I think a lot of it has to do with really rethinking and innovating and entrepreneurial and introducing students to the larger picture of sustainability. So I think in our department, we all, as faculty, we all try to bring it in. And I've been running a course specifically focused on it for many, many years now. And I think the reason why I started that course was for the reasons that, as you pointed out, that it's been very linear and the industry is very complex, and most students didn't really understand the impacts that were happening, not only the umbrella of sustainability within ethics, waste, environmental impacts. So we really try to break it down and also get them to experiment and innovate and really think differently about the materials they're using, understanding where they're coming from. I've also run a course to India on sustainable handcrafts where we actually I brought students to organic cotton farmers to understand the source of the materials, because I feel like there's a big disconnect between students purchasing their fabrics and really understanding where they're coming from and how they're made. And it is a globalized industry, and understanding the impacts of it around the world, their choices as designers that they're having. So I think it's really important that students start to understand the bigger impacts of the choices they have as designers, and that they do have choices, and that it is overwhelming. I remember when I first started teaching the class, actually, there was very little out there about, like, for the general public about sustainability. So I had to kind of coax students into the class. And I told them at the front of the discussion, I'm like, this is not, you're going to do a lot of like reading and articles and stuff about sort of the impacts of this. And it's not to scare you away from this industry, because clothing is one of the basic necessities of life. So we're always going to need it, right? This is something we all have to have, but we need to think about how we can do this better. We don't want to be educating designers to go into an industry to keep it the way it is. It is not, it's not responsible. It's not a sustainable industry as it stands. And although there have been a lot of shifts, over the past, I would say 5 years, I think there's just much more awareness, especially about, and I think social media has helped in that and pushing some aspects of transparency against the industry. But there's so much that still needs to be done. And I think, this Monday was the anniversary of Rana Plaza, the collapse. And still, I think, I read a recent statistic that said that in Bangladesh, still 0% of garment workers are paid a living wage. So what has happened in those 2 years? I mean, those 10 years, it's just, there's so much work still to be done. So the more we can raise awareness, and students are just open to this and they're thirsty for it now. Like, we have a big sustainability initiative just at MassArt in general and the entire school, and students are ready. And they want it now. So that's really exciting to see. There's been a shift in mindset, I think, of this generation as well.
And I should have said at the top to our audience that we will have a discussion among the panel, and then we will open it up to questions from our audience participants as well. You can put your questions in the Q&A function, and I will answer as many of those that appear there, as well as the questions that were already submitted before our discussion began. We thank you and appreciate those questions that we got in advance. There are a lot of them. I will try to get to as many as I can in the time that we allow. But one of the questions, and I think it's an important place at this juncture before we jump into the meat of our discussion, is really defining terms. So when we're talking about sustainability within the fashion industry, and we're talking about social justice in the fashion industry, what do you think that means? And I will go in reverse this time and start with Jennifer.
All right, is that mute? Oh, well, that means a lot of things, I think. But for me, the reason why I first came into fashion in general was sort of through craft and through the diversity of craft around this world. And what I've seen over the last 30 years is this just immense decline in craftsmanship and traditional craft and the value of that. Artisans, I think, and garment workers in terms of social justice, I think there's a real inequity that's out there right now and has been, and it continues to grow. And I think that's a point that really needs to be addressed. And I think, you know, Ngozi and Alex are great examples of working through that. And I think, you know, yeah, there's many issues on social justice, but I feel like that point right there. There's also, of course, the bigger picture of just designers in general and models and inequity and social justice in terms of diversity and inclusiveness. So I think there's many, many ways that it taps into the industry. Those are just two that really rise to me because I think garment workers and artisans never have been acknowledged for the value of their work in the way that they should be.
And Ngozi, before I go to you, I want to also point out the fact that these aren't two separate things. Sustainability and social justice aren't separate. That's why I'm talking about them together, because in my reporting, it became very clear that you can't do one without the other. You must do both.
Yes, I agree 100%. And when I first started talking about social justice, human rights being part of sustainability and fashion a few years ago, people looked at me like I was nuts, but I feel like it has become more mainstream, the idea, but like, what is the purpose of using just sustainable cotton or recycling plastic bottles into clothing if the people who make them and live in the communities where all this trash is, like, live in abject conditions, right? And so again, with this being the anniversary week of the 10th anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse, it's so important that we keep that in mind. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons that I continue to like the phrases of like ethical fashion and sustainable fashion is because when we talk about regenerative and circular, we're again focusing on the materials and not the people, right? And so it is really important to center the people in this process. And to my mind, part of the reason why we're able to have such unsustainable environmental conditions is because the people have been so devalued that companies just overproduce because they know they don't have to pay people fairly or pay people sometimes at all to make these clothes. So there's almost no cost to making the clothes. People aren't paid right. If the externalities of the materials are all pushed on society, then companies can continue to operate. And I guess the other reason that I think about the shifting language to circularity and regenerative is that it excludes a whole population of people from the conversation, right? Like, I can figure out what circularity means. I can think about regenerative, but like I've got, a couple of degrees behind me. We can just talk about what we mean in plain language so we can be more inclusive of more people and have more solutions to some of these environmental and human rights issues.
And Alex, what about you? What does sustainability and social justice mean to you?
Well, sustainability to me has become a very dirty word because a lot of people or a lot of brands have been just throwing it out so loosely. Every day there's a new sustainable brand, and you ask questions and like, oh, we're creating a new fabric. And I'm like, why are we creating new when there's enough dead stock raw material out there that'll probably last us for another 20, 30 years? To me, sustainability is using what's around you, what's available, what's in front of you. The same way, we're creating any bag. We're taking something that typically ends up in the waste, and we're giving it a new life, a better life, and regenerating it, reimagining it, and putting systems into place. So this way, in the future, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a better community, better living situation for everybody. And it's not just plastic that we're working with anymore. We're starting now to experiment with different fabrics and scraps, and the same way we've been doing with leather for all our lives. We started working with plastic, and now it's like we're tapping into the apparel factories and taking their scraps and remnants after they do a production run. We go in, sweep the factory floor, and we take that material and regenerate it into a new textile that can then be turned into a bespoke collection or one of a kind collection. But as to what we were talking about regarding social justice, it's the bigger part of it. It's like what you were talking about with the bottles. The communities that are doing certain things, yeah, it's great. It's cleaning up the planet, but the people they're employing to do this are still, suffering. They're still living in terrible conditions. Like everyone always came up to me and it's like, oh, you should take this to China. You should take this to India. Take it overseas. And I'm like, there's no reason for that. The whole point of this is to enrich our own community, clean up our own community, create jobs and livable wages and better conditions. And, that's a big part of what we're doing. Yeah, you can make the latest and greatest fabric, but if you're not taking care of the people or considering the people that are making it, are you really being sustainable? Are you being ethical? So a lot of there's, it all comes back to the greenwashing and the word sustainability. How everybody just throws it around, but there's a lot of parts to it. And without sustainability, you need social justice in order to create sustainability, and you need sustainability to create, it goes back and forth, vice versa. But it's all about the community and who's, where it's starting and, what you're creating. It's not, there's a lot of BS out there, excuse my French, but it's, to be really sustainable, you got to use what you have, what's in front of you.
So I want to ask you all and open it up. What are some of the biggest impediments or challenges there are in doing this type of work, either individually that you have faced, or as an industry? What are some of the structural barriers from really breaking through and making this an essential part of the industry, thinking both of the human side of it as well as the impact on the planet? Anybody can jump in.
I'll jump in right away. With us, our biggest holdback was just scaling this at first, because it's so time sensitive as to what we're doing, how we're processing the plastic, stripping it, cleaning it, weaving it, and then making the product. Making the finished product is the easy part. It's making the textile that all the time and effort goes into. And, being sustainable, upcycling, it's not cheap, it's expensive, it's labor intensive. So right now our price points are a little higher. And, one of the comments I was getting was like, oh, you're only making product for a certain market. But once we do get this automated loom that we're building from scratch, we're going to be able to reduce costs anywhere from 30, 40, maybe 50% as to what we're currently selling the bags. And the more looms we get, the less expensive the process gets, and it becomes a bag that anybody and everybody could buy, hence the name. But it's all about just putting new systems, creating new solutions. But everything we're doing right now, this is all new. Sustainability is still in its very infancy stages. So we're constantly learning day in, day out. But it's all about trial and error and a learning curve for everybody, I think.
Jennifer?
Sure. From the education perspective, I think some of the challenges are getting students to continue to work in this way when there's so many things around them that entice them that in the industry that's set up not to work in this way. So to really pave a path that you want to source sustainable materials, you want to really think about your waste, think about exactly how if you're going into this price point, really consider your choices, and the choices are not very big. So when they get out of like the class or they're getting towards graduation, it's like a lot of times it's easier like to switch back to the old way of doing things. And so it has to be a real sincere decision to work in this direction, to continue it, because it's not right now an easy path. And just like Alex is saying, you really have to kind of pave your way in it. You have to really make that commitment to it. So I wish in so many ways that it was easier. It should be easier. This shouldn't be, this should be the norm. This shouldn't be an exception to work in this way. Just having more support, more options available for young designers emerging to kind of work in this way. Seeing opportunities that can help support them instead of closing doors. I always tell students too that the skills that you're gaining is you can go into an industry and you can help change a company, right? You can bring this knowledge with you, and maybe it's not happening well right now in that company or that design house, but now you have some knowledge and you can help reshape that. And that's what we all need to be doing, is reshaping a system that's really broken, but that's set in a way that is very hard to change. So I think those are big challenges.
Ngozi?
Yeah, I agree that the biggest challenges are helping people envision an industry that could be different from the industry that exists. I think it's easier with younger people, at least the ones I'm meeting. I would guest lectured at 2 different universities this week, and so I think it's easier for them because I feel like the people who are in school right now recognize how much of their future relies on doing things differently. But I think it is still a challenge just thinking about when Custom Collaborative first started placing people in internships, which was in maybe 2017 or 18. So many companies were taken aback when I said, you have to pay the interns, right? Because people are used to unpaid internships, but like these are companies that are making millions and billions of dollars, right? You could pay somebody $15 an hour. And if you don't pay somebody $15 an hour, one, that's against the law, right, if for a private company, but also, what are you saying about who can come and work for your company? Because there's so many people who can't afford unpaid internships. So you're really blocking out possibilities of change and development and innovation in your business. So I really think the fact that the small organizations and represented here, I feel like it's great that we're doing what we're doing, but we have so much in terms of limits on our capital and resources that we need to really expand this work and educate the consumer, because I feel like that's part of it, right? We do need government regulation, but we also need consumers to push companies, but consumers have to know what's going on. They have to know that there's slave labor within the chain, right? They have to know what the plastics and other manufactured textiles are doing to the environment.
And Ngozi, you were anticipating my next question, because I want to talk about that industry landscape and what the rules and regulations are regarding sustainability, or whether what exists is enough. And one of the questions that we got from an audience member before we started was wondering if anybody else besides New York has introduced legislation, for example, on sustainability. And the New York Fashion Act would require fashion companies that generate more than $100 million in revenue to disclose their supply chains, all their production tiers, and where in that process they create the most impact, things like labor abuses, greenhouse gases, and chemical use. Is this the sort of thing that's needed? Do you need regulation to push this change, or is it something else? Is there a way to make this seem very profitable? Generally speaking, companies don't act in the interest of the goodness of their hearts. They act when there's something in it for them. What is needed to actually push brands to do this more? Anybody can jump in. Yeah,
So
Jennifer, you can start. Sorry. Sorry, Ngozi. I'll go to you after Jennifer.
I was just going to say, I think it's incredibly important legislation. What I've noticed globally is that real change can happen with legislation because it holds businesses accountable. I know in the US, I think in 2021, they passed the Garment Workers Protection Act in California. And that was a huge thing, right? That was that basically what that said is that because so many garment workers were being paid by piece for the garment they were making, not by hour, it ends up, if anybody sews knows this, it takes a lot more usually to create, whatever the garment is then, and you're getting paid just by whatever they're willing to give you for that garment. So it ended up being garment workers right in LA were being paid much underpaid for their work. So now they're having to be paid on an hourly minimum wage, at least rate. So those changes are huge, I think. And then globally, you see the EU doing a lot of things. I know in France, they enacted a law now that all companies, fashion companies producing, they have to take responsibility for the waste. A lot of brands used to incinerate their goods that they didn't sell. And so now any waste that's left over, now they have to take their own responsibility. They can't burn it. So I think those are real good, positive changes that are happening. And a lot of that is happening through legislation.
Ngozi.
Yes, and so I think Jennifer covered most of what I was going to say, but I would say two things: that the extended producer responsibility that France is spearheading, I think, is going across Europe, which is good because then that means that they're bigger markets, and so that will probably push U.S. businesses to do some different ways of doing business. Also, SB 62, as Jennifer spoke about, that passed in California last year, Custom Collaborative, along with a coalition of other organizations, has been supporting the idea of a broader legislation like that. And so then last year, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand introduced the Fabric Act, which has some of those same requirements. So basically what was happening is that companies would subcontract, right, to other companies. And so then the company that was actually selling the clothes that had their label, because they had subcontracted to the smaller companies, they were able to work around their violations of labor law and pretend that they weren't ultimately the ones responsible for paying people only $3 an hour. And so we're hoping to get that enacted on a federal level. So I think that really legislation is the way. I mean, even if we look at some of the accords from Bangladesh, since Rana Plaza, companies have said, oh yes, we're going to do this voluntarily and we're going to do that voluntarily. And so few of those things have actually come into place. So we do need regulation. We need government to step in, right? Because that's the representative of all of us.
I mean, to jump in, I think regulation is a big part of it. It's super important, especially with these, these huge $100 million companies, because, they're all coming out with a new product now and saying, oh, this is a sustainable product that we're creating, but, it's less than 1% than their overall revenues. So like, are they just marketing this product to cover up all their sins? So a lot of just let us give this to the public. So this one, everyone sees us as, you know, we're good guys, we're good people. We're not, you know, destroying the planet, but it all comes down to accountability, traceability, visibility. And that's why this Fashion Act, I think, is so important. And it should apply to just about every fashion company. You know, this way, everything is ethical, ethically made and responsibly made, and the employees are taken care of. But, you know, it's all about accountability and transparency. The same way we're building Anybag, you can actually see your physical waste, your trash bags going into a product and then coming out as a, you know, as a finished product that you're going to wear for life. But it, you know, to me, it's for all these bigger brands to really step into the sustainability world, or this sustainability game, if you want to call it that. They really have to start all over and like implode and start from zero. And a lot of them aren't going to do that because they're making too much money. So it's up to companies, brands like us, like we're talking right now. It's up to us to really pave the way and create the solutions, create the brands and the companies that are clean and recycling and regenerating and doing all the things we're supposed to be doing. So this way that the future, you know, we have a better place to live.
And Alex, I want to ask you a follow-up to that, because there are regulations like the New York law that's really focused on the fashion industry and very large players in the fashion industry, 100 million or greater. But what do you need as somebody who is doing this work? What do you, whether it's through regulation or something else, what do you need in other designers working on the local level like you need to be able to be supported in this work?
I mean, it all comes down to money, funding, grant money, assistance, because, you know, I'm living in New York City. My factory is in the heart of New York City on 29th and 6th Avenue. Our overhead is through the roof. And, you know, we're in a building that once housed about maybe 20 different factories, and now we're the only one standing. You know, on my street on 29th Street, we're all manufacturers. There's nobody left. We employ 35 employees in my factory. I'd say we're the largest, oldest, and largest, oldest, and still existing factory in New York City at our size and capacity. But to build what we have now, that's been around for 40 years, it's almost impossible because of how expensive it's become, because of rent, because of the taxes at the end of the year. We should be getting refunds and assistance before the jobs that we're creating. And now with Anybag, it's like DSNY, I believe, spends $100 million a year trying to recycle this. But we figured out a simple, easy solution. We're doing it right in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by $1 million condos. And then there's us on the 5th floor, Geppetto and his elves making, the latest and greatest. But, simple solutions sometimes is all you need. And everyone tries to complicate things way too often. And that's usually where everybody drops the ball. So for us, simplicity, it goes a long way. And why overthink things?
So I want to talk a little bit now about the consumer end, because I know a lot of people who are joining us today want to know how they, as consumers, can contribute to sustainability and social justice in the choices that they make with their clothing. So those who cannot make their own clothing in Gozzi, what can consumers think about, and what can they look for, and what can they do in terms of the choices that they make?
Yep, great question. And even some of those of us who can make our own clothing, like, don't have the time to. So we really do. So, I mean, I think there are so many things. A lot of people thrift. I'm not a huge thrifter, but some of the clothes that I wear are vintage, right? Like two of my favorite suits were my grandmother's. People can learn how to mend their clothes, or take them to the tailor to have them mended, or have clothes altered if they're, high value clothes or clothes that they really like. Part of the reason that people throw away clothes or return clothes, which is another environmental impact, all of the shipping back and forth, is because clothes don't fit. So I think that if people shop local, right, they can try on clothes. We used to do that when I was young, go in stores and try on clothes and buy them. People can, the clothes that they buy, get them altered so they fit their bodies and look the way they want to look. And I think that a lot of places do clothing swaps, like Global Fashion Exchange. They do swaps. People can do that in person. They have like online swap groups. And I think that when you do buy something, just take a beat and say like, is this something that I will wear, that I will value, that I will treasure? And is it going to make me feel good? And if so, like think about a strategy for how long to keep it. Because I hear the argument that sometimes, you know, there's this throwaway clothing that people buy because I don't know, people have the idea that like, oh, poor people buy throwaway clothing, but it's not really the low income people who buy throwaway clothing. It's these people who do these hauls, like young people who might be in school. So I think it's just so important to buy clothes that you value, that are going to be good and that are not plastic. Those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's more like similar to what you said, but you know, just it's all about the education, looking at the label, where it's made, who's making it. Just we're a lot more advanced now than we were 20 years ago. You know, we could Google anything and we could look up anything. So it's all about, you know, who's making the product, where it's being made, the type of material, where is it being sourced. Like a lot of the new brands, the local brands are, you know, all about that. And, you know, when I shop for clothes, you know, nothing, you know, when I shop in Europe compared to when I shop in New York when I'm traveling for work, you know, the experience I get in Europe is so much better, so much far superior than what we get here. Like you can walk in any store and try a pair of pants on and be like, all right, we'll hem this, we'll take this in the back, come back tomorrow and it'll fit perfectly. And I have clothes that have been with me for 25, 30 years that I bought when I went on my first trip with my father to Italy for a leather show. And it's all about quality and the craftsmanship. And yes, it might be a little more expensive, but look how long it's lasted, you know, and that's really all it is. It's just being a better consumer, an educated consumer.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think I completely agree with everything that's been said. I think reducing, you know, your consumption as a consumer, being really purposeful about making your purchases. Why are you making it? Exactly what Ngozi was pointing to, you know, is it something you really need? I think what happens a lot of times is we've been, you know, we're all a part of this. We've been sort of socially conditioned. We walk in a store, the turnover in stores is incredible now. Like, you know, you walk into a store, I think Zara produces 24 collections a year. I mean, so within a few weeks, you're kind of conditioned to expect something new. And then you see things that are so marked down and you don't really need it, but the price is cheap. Many people don't really stop and think about, why is it so cheap? How can you sell something that cheap? If you walk into a fabric store, you know the price of fabric. I mean, like, how is something so cheap when the fabric is not, you know? So I think it's really stopping and pausing before you make that purchase. And researching brands, exactly what Alex is saying. I think really understanding, like, and there is a lot of greenwashing that's happening. We all know that. And I think it's being really mindful and really kind of, you know, get in and research a little bit more, know where it's being made exactly. Are there certifications attached to it that could be helpful? And I think also just a bigger thing is raising awareness for consumers. It's also like getting them involved, like about these legislations that could happen that they could possibly vote on, right? Like if consumers, you know, there's a lot of power consumers have right now. If consumers stop buying things, a company will change, right? Because they're going to be forced to. So I think consumers have more power than they think, and just, yeah, researching more and just being more mindful in purchases and just, yeah, and knowing what's going on legislatively, I think is really important.
Yeah, to add to the 24 collections that Zara produces, it's not necessary. Like we don't need producing this many this many seasons or this many collections for, there's only 4 seasons. And we've become trained, or the consumers become trained to understand or to think that, oh, if I don't buy it now, it's gonna get marked down in 2 weeks, sometimes in 3 weeks. So you got to step back and like, why was this even produced, or what's the point? And you walk into a store and you see a pair of jeans for like $12 and you're like, how is that even possible? You know, like the fabric, the production, the shipping costs, all that you got to take into effect, because anything you ship now to anywhere, it's at least $10 domestically. So imagine shipping something overseas, you know, across the world. It's just the systems need to be, you know, it's all about visibility. Everything just needs to be a little more there needs to be a little more awareness out there.
Yeah, so I want to get to some of the questions that were submitted. Some people submitted a similar or duplicate question. So I may change how I ask it just a little bit. But the first one sort of gets to a point that you were making, Jennifer. Someone asked, how do consumers know the sustainability score of fashion products that is behind specific companies such as Patagonia? This has been a fraught issue for the industry, that there really isn't a sustainability score. And when there was an attempt to try to do that, it really faced a lot of backlash because of greenwashing. Do you think that a sustainability score is something that can happen? And if not, how do consumers measure when they're picking up an item what the sustainability impact is? Anyone? And Jennifer, go
Sure.
ahead.
So there is, I know that there was an issue in 2022 about an index that the Sustainable Apparel Coalition had been using, but there is an organization called Remake, which is a nonprofit that does an accountability report and scores different companies on their practices. So Remake, REMAKE, that is a good place to look. But again, I also think if you look at the smaller companies and the companies that have said, like, this is what we are focused on. So just a couple of women-owned brands I'm thinking about, like Eileen Fisher, Mara Hoffman, there are some others, but just to investigate them. I mean, all of the information, so much of it is available on social media and the website. And if companies don't have that information, one, that tells you something, but also with you, the engagement that these companies have with social media, you can send them a message. You don't even have to do a direct message. I would just do it in the comments and say, like, well, what is your sustainability commitment? What is your plan? And they would respond.
All right, another question that we got is asking questions about the practice of textile recycling, where textiles are sent off to places like Senegal and Ghana and elsewhere. Can you explain that a little bit and what the impact of that is?
Well, I can take a stab at that one. I think maybe they're pointing out more towards secondhand clothes. I'm not sure if they're talking about textile recycling or secondhand. We're always told we should, of course, we don't want to throw away clothes, but then we're also donating all these clothes, and the amount of donations that happen. Often they don't stay in the United States. Let's just say we're looking at the US. They often go to other parts of the world. Ghana, Senegal is a good example. Haiti, you name it. You've got them all over the world, and they don't need these they don't need these goods, really. It's creating a whole, it's like taking our waste and putting it somewhere else, and now they have to deal with it. Oh, but it's supposed to be helping. But in most of it is not a help at all. It's taking away from, it's a way that's also impacting the traditional techniques, the handwork, the clothing that's being made in that country, because now you've got all these other goods coming in. It's adding another place for waste. And although a lot of places have tried to, make businesses out of this, it's ultimately, there's always waste that's left over of this. So we just moved our waste to somewhere else, essentially, and it's not a solution. And I think a lot of people, general consumers think, well, and it is true, like, what do I do with my garments then, right? Like, because if you think you're donating and you think you're doing something good, and ultimately it's actually doesn't end up a lot of times in good places.
There was a story, I think a few weeks ago, somebody put a tracker in a sneaker that was supposed to go to a recycling plant, and they tracked it and it ended up on a completely different path. And it's a lot of people are hiding a lot of, what they're saying they're doing. It's not really happening. But, with the textiles and, all the excess, like you said, we're just shipping our junk somewhere else. The same thing we used to do with plastic until I think Southeast Asia cut the cord on us. They're like, all right, we don't want it anymore. And now the US has a big problem on our hands and no one's really talking about it, but all our waste is kind of just sitting in the middle of America and on barges surrounding us. We have nowhere to dispose of it. So, it's a bubble that's going to really, I think, burst really soon, and people are going to become a lot more aware of what's really going on. But it all comes back to the greenwashing and the cover up of what we're really doing with our trash. When we recycle something, we're starting now to realize that most of the time it's not getting recycled or it can't be recycled. And the reason why, I always go back to the DSNY or New York City, the reason why they don't put new plans in play is because once you get someone to stop doing something that they've been doing for so long, like separating their trash, their paper, their plastic, not separating it the right way, and we tell people the way you've been, throwing out your plastic is actually wrong. Don't do that until we come out with a new system. No one's ever going to come back to that process. And when you unveil the new plan, so we got to stick to the way we're currently doing it, even though it's wrong, until we have the correct process of the system in place, and then we roll it out. So it's like, it's a win-win. I mean, it's a lose-lose, but it's all about the systems and the processes that we put in place. And that's the only way that we're actually going to make change.
Another question asks, how much is happening in and around Boston? Is there a regenerative fashion community here? Jennifer, can you shed some light on that? What's happening outside of places like New York and LA?
I know we always get overshadowed by New York for good reason, but we're smaller. But I will say there's a lot of local designers popping up, emerging designers that I think are working in sustainable methods here in Boston. I think same issues that you're facing in New York, how hard it is to start that, the high cost of production or space. But I think there's, in terms of regenerative, I don't know, can't think of one that's completely focusing on regenerative, but I can think of a lot of sort of, actually one of our alums, Queen Adeline, is, she's from Ghana originally. Her garments are all sustainably made, and that's a big focus of her work, and she's very local and she's very engaged. And so there's a lot of small companies, I think, which is great to see designers coming out and trying to forge a path, but it's like everybody's been saying, it's not the easiest. But I think also there's a lot of cooperative kind of, which is different than the industry. This is, I'll point out, I think this is a great thing. The fashion industry was always very, designers worked very isolated, and it was about really like, oh, I'm not going to share my secret. I'm not going to share this or that because, you're competing against each other. But sustainability and sustainable issues, this is like an issue that touches everyone. So you have to work together. And I think for me, that is the most positive thing that can come out of this, is like, so young designers kind of emerging designers coming out and working together, sharing resources, like that can be a great thing. That's a powerful tool, because maybe you can't afford something on your own, but if you're working more collaboratively and you can help support each other. And these are issues we need, these are resources we need to be sharing, sort of not holding to ourselves anymore. This is like, you need to be sharing stuff with each other.
Here's a question that I'm going to throw to Ngozi, because we talked a little bit about this in our conversation. Many fashion brands have made progress in improving impact on the environment, but what about those who make our clothes? Designers and makers, most of whom are women of color, have been left behind. Fashion could be a force for good in terms of workers' rights, economic empowerment, preserving not only the environment, but also the artisanal and cultural traditions. Fashion can be a force to value women's work. That's what ethical fashion means. And Ngozi, can you talk a little bit more about how artisanal work, cultural traditions, and the work of women of color in particular can play in making fashion more sustainable?
Yes, that is a big question, but in general, women are and have been the creators of fashion, and the buyers, right, for themselves and for their families. And women are, in general, in modern fashion, paid the least, right? So women do the work of making the clothes and then buy the clothes, but women make the least money. And I think that there is a space where we can envision that the women who create and design clothes are actually artists and artisans and craftspeople, and value that, and value the skills and the ingenuity that happens. Like, most people can't sew because most people can't figure out, well, like, how would you take this two-dimensional flat piece of fabric and make it into something that actually fits and conforms to and flatters a body, right? And so then there is great value in that. Not any less value than, driving a truck or being a bricklayer, but because those jobs are mainly done by men, those jobs pay more than the women who make the clothes receive. And so I think that, speaking on behalf of Custom Collaborative, people come to us from so many different cultural backgrounds, and what they bring really beautifies clothing, right? And I think I say beautify because it's important to say that clothing is our first form of expression. And so that's how people know who we are, by what we wear in some ways. And so I just think if we think about these people as artists and artisans, we can develop ways to reward them for the work that they do. One of the women who is in Custom Collaboratives programs came from Mexico and had never sewed before, but now, before she came to Custom Collaborative, now she knows how. She's embarked on an embroidery journey. She takes excess leather and makes beautiful accessories. And so I just think that the idea of really rewarding women and centering the maker in the clothing that we make and the accessories will help to transform. And so I just happen to have like this. So this was a piece of scrap leather. So it's an iridescent piece of leather, which is kind of weird, but it's something that we got donated from a company. It's pre-consumer waste, right? And so then we gave it to one of our participants, and she made this little cute wallet. And so there's so much that we can do. It's just we have to think about how we're doing it. And so this is a case where really, I don't think computers will save us, right? People actually make clothes, and having computers make clothes isn't going to help us make fewer clothes, but it's really about going deep and recognizing the cultural intelligence that's within people, and using that to create great goods and get us out of this crisis.
And we only have a minute left, so this isn't fair. I'm going to throw this to Jennifer. We have one question. We talked a lot about Gen Z really getting this. How do you incentivize older consumers to really put sustainability first in their choices?
I think that it's just about raising awareness, honestly. The more that people know, I feel like the older consumers, they want to be educated. So I think as soon as, if the awareness is raised, if there's more out there that's visible, those choices will be easy. I don't think it's so complicated. It's just that, you got to kind of find your voice through this to make sure that it's being heard, and that they're getting the correct information, and they're not getting inaccurate information. And that's hard in this day and age, as we all know. Like, what is the real facts?
Yeah. Well, this has been such a great conversation, and it only scratches the surface, but I do appreciate all of you for taking the time, for joining us for this really important talk. Thanks to all of you. And thanks for all of our audience members for joining us on this discussion as part of the Boston Globe's Sustainability Week. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.